So welcome everyone to our Mineral Resource Governance webinar. So I'm Jess Zachariah, I'm the Marketing Manager at K2Fly, and joining me is Cesar Carrasco. So he is our General Manager of the Americas and will introduce himself a bit later on. So today we are going to be presenting a new paradigm for resource reporting governance titled the Mineral Resource Governance Suite, which essentially forms your internal or body knowledge center. So I will introduce you to these components of this suite, and Cesar will showcase these solutions and how they interact with one another. So to start, I thought I would just take a minute or so to introduce K2Fly. So our brand is built off 10 different solutions, which are at the bottom here, that deliver confidence to companies in the transparency and accuracy of their data for disclosure. So this is across both your natural and your mineral resources for asset intensive industries. So if we take a look at this image here, the top half of the image illustrates activities and processes that occur on the land. So this includes things like access approvals for exploration activities or ground disturbance. It includes safeguarding cultural heritage, managing tailings, or rehabilitating the land. So today we're going to be focusing on the lower half of the image. So we will be discussing activities that deal with extracting minerals and managing these assets with appropriate levels of governance. So this mineral resource governance vision has a foundation, and that's starting at the bottom here, that begins with the capture of operational data reflected through a workflow and approvals process that authorised people do to prepare your data for compliance and disclosure to required stock exchanges. So this ensures you're licensed to operate. So the value of integrating mineral resource governance encompasses the processes related to mineral resource and ore reserve reporting and key technical data supporting those public disclosures, including block models and reconciliation. So that I'm going to go through that now. So if we start at the top of this, we've got our solution, which is resource disclosure. So this is designed to create an audible MR disclosure that's compliant with all regulations. The system can capture all data needed for your mineral reporting in one system with capabilities for approval and sign-off. This enables all stakeholders involved in the capture, review and approval process to have access to the same data. The solution makes this data defensible and traceable. So ESG is embedded fully into our product and it's fully integrated with disclosures of resources and reserves. Having this data available strengthens a company's focus on ESG as it becomes more prominent in the industry. And this can be achieved through our resource disclosure solution. So adding to this is a second component. So this is Model Manager. So when it's integrated with resource disclosure, which Cesar will show you later on, users are able to directly link the block model data to the correct site or data capture sheet. So this strengthens the governance of your data capture by making the fully coded block model and reporting criteria transparent and available for auditors. So adding to this, and lastly, is mine reconciliation. So this provides more clarity on the MR estimates to deliver confidence in predicting future mine production. So this ensures your models, plans, mining and processing performance data are captured at the right time and stored in a central location. So by integrating all three of these components into a single platform, companies are able to achieve the strongest available governance, auditability and optionality for automating technical processes that underpin the value of a mining company. It brings together a range of technical professionals into one process, simplifying the process. So it reduces the likelihood of fines and penalties for misleading or inaccurate reports as well. And most importantly, our MRG suite provides assurance that what is happening on the ground is accurately reflected in your public disclosures, protecting your license to operate. So I'm going to pass to Cesar now, who will introduce himself and then demonstrate these solutions for you. Thanks, Cesar.
Thanks, Jessica, and welcome everybody. Just very quickly, Cesar Carrasco, General Manager for the Americas at K2Fly. The big thing is this is a paradigm shift in how we view information and how we review specifically mineral resource and mineral reserve information. And so a little bit about me specifically. I have been in the mining industry now for 16 years, and I have through that tenure, I have applied ESG principles across all my work, and I continue to do so at K2Fly. And so I want to make you aware that I am here to support any change management initiative that you might be running through, specifically as it applies to mineral resource, mineral reserve, as well as any of the land management solutions, natural resource governance solutions that K2Fly offers. And that's me. Now, in terms of what I want to talk to you about today, and tying back to what Jessica has said already, I want to emphasize that today, customers are taking advantage of one of the three solutions that Jessica has summarized: resource disclosure, mine reconciliation, and model manager. However, the solutions are not fully integrated. But what I want to show you is that, or discuss with you, is that the solutions could be fully integrated, and what that could look like, what that vision is to ensure that we are able to create that ore body knowledge center that Jessica has already mentioned. Because then the creation of that ore body knowledge center becomes a central source of information to implement robust governance for public disclosure, block model information, and mine reconciliation processes. So with that, I'm going to take over the screen from Jessica, and I'm going to give you a tour of how we envision achieving that within the K2Fly platforms. And here we go. So now I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. And let me make sure I start a timer over on this side. So what you are looking at now is our resource disclosure platform. But before we dive into it, I just want to remind you that you are welcome to ask any questions via the chat functionality, and we will get to those questions towards the end of the session, or we will follow up with you separately, depending on how we do with time. So let's get started. You're probably wondering at the forefront, what is resource disclosure, or what does it do? What does the resource disclosure application do? Well, in a nutshell, the resource disclosure application allows us to capture mineral resource and mineral reserve data to facilitate the creation of reports for stock exchanges and the various reporting codes across the globe. That is essentially the value proposition of resource disclosure. And I'm going to tie in discussing model manager and mine reconciliation and how that applies to the holistic value proposition. The building block for this value proposition is the interface that you're seeing now. Specifically, what we're looking at within the resource disclosure platform is an organizational chart, an organogram. This is actually describing the mining business. In this case, we have a fictitious mining business called Mining Corporation, and we've already defined an organizational chart for this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the rest of that organizational chart. And this organizational chart can actually be configured in a very specific manner as it applies to your business. But in this case, what you'll see is that the hierarchy levels are the definition of business unit by commodity. So we have iron ore, metal products, coal, etc. Within those business units, we operate at different areas of the world, which is why the next level in the organizational chart is the country. And within each country, we have specific operations, mine operations. So for example, in Canada, we have a Neve North and South mine operations. In South Africa, we have a Deep Reef operation. And ultimately, the lowest level hierarchy within this org chart is the reporting area. Now, the reporting area is going to be the actual operations within that site. So we would be talking about stockpiles, potentially underground operations, open pit operations, and in certain cases, projects that you may be wanting to keep track of from the premise of mineral inventory management. So In terms of the reporting areas, once we have the business defined within the platform, we are then able to work at identifying who is responsible for primarily two activities: the capture of data, the data collection. So we know that usually that's a mining engineer or a geologist actually going through that data collection. And then who is responsible for sign off? And that sign off is going to be likely at the corporate level, perhaps interdepartmentally. Geology department reviews the data, the mine engineer department reviews the data, so that everybody is in agreement as to what is going to be collected as it shifts from one location to another within the validation process and readiness for public disclosure. So with that in mind, at any one of these organizational levels within the platform, we can assign responsibilities. So what you're looking at here now is quickly the responsibility definition interfacing. We can define responsibilities across the different levels. But like I was saying, we're talking about data collection and review of that data and ultimate approval of that data. That's the organizational chart. It's the who is responsible here. One of the things that the platform allows us to do as well to validate the responsibility assignment. Why is this person assigned a sign-off approval, or why is this person assigned data capture, is within the platform, we can actually capture the details of a user's affiliations, their qualifications, and their work history. And what essentially that enables us to do within the platform is create your own qualified person, competent person register. So you have the ability to satisfy the competency principle that is usually tied to these reporting codes that we usually have to report under. So that's why this is very important here in terms of defining the business unit or the mining business as a whole through the organizational chart, and then being able to tie that back to the responsibilities and the work experience and qualifications that may allow that person to be reflected as the competent or qualified person. So once we are able to configure that and determine the responsibilities, we can also then configure the rest of the interface. And what we're configuring are the details that we are ultimately interested in collecting. Remember, resource disclosure helps us capture mineral resource and mineral reserve data. We do that by allowing the user ease of configuration for things like units of measure. We're able to define units of measure. And what we're talking about when we say units of measure, we're talking about mass units, and we're talking about grade units. So things like ounces per ton, grams per ton, tons, short tons, long tons, the proverbial tonnes versus ton. And by the definition of the units of measure, we are able to apply calculations, expressions that allow us to convert the data from metric insertions. We can capture the data in metric, but when it comes to actually disclosing the data, we can apply a conversion to imperial units. As well, we can define constituents. Constituents are essentially the commodities. So in the premise of the organizational charts that I shared, we're talking about things like the iron element, gold, copper, silver. And if we think about agnico, we're talking about silver, nickel, cobalt. And the constituents can be combined into material types. When we talk about a mine operation, yes, there is a primary commodity, gold, but there's always byproducts or additional items that we want to report. Maybe we want to calculate a gold equivalency, for example. And so we're able to define material types in that sense. The most important part of the system settings definitions is going to be the definition of classifications, which is ultimately what we're interested in reporting. Classifications are going to be things like reserves and resources, which is ultimately what we are reporting into public disclosure. With the configuration defined, and there's certainly a lot more in here that can be done to configure this, but what we are looking to configure by providing these details are the data capture workflows specifically. And so within the interface, workflows are defined and accessible through the what we call the my work tab. And there's an indication that there's some work I have to do here because of the red dot. So I'm going to go in and go into the workflow, clicking here. And these are the workflow definitions. Now, what workflows are a structured step-by-step process for how we are going to upload the data, how we are going to review the data, and ultimately how we are going to sign off the data. So I'm going to focus specifically on the debrief site, which is essentially that South African site in the organizational chart. End of year 2023. We're going to look at the first page, which is the welcome page. The welcome page allows us to set the stage and the user to acknowledge that they understand what they are work with, the units that we're trying to work with, and allow the user to say, I understand what's being asked of me as I move through the data capture workflow. Now, I will also point out really quickly that each one of these is what we call a traffic light, and the color codes have specific meanings. For example, the blue ones are workflows or data capture events that I have not started yet. We have some in-progress events, and we even have some completed events. You'll look and see the reserves has been marked as completed, which means from a data capture perspective, it's been completed. And now I'm working to make sure that somebody signs it off. And that fires off a notification to the sign-off responsibility. Now, in my case, I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but what we're going to be looking at here now is just quickly show you what a data capture page for reserves looks like once it's complete. Very simple. For the debrief site, we are collecting tonnage, contained gold, and we are calculating the grade based on that information. The gray cells have a specific meaning. They are calculated fields. We can actually look at expressions that were built within the table. You can see that we're calculating grams per ton, and we have the formulation that is required to achieve that calculation on the right-hand side as I hover over the mouse there. What's also important to note is that any value in here can actually be supported in a very specific manner. Each one of these cells has a box for which we can request details. It's what we call the history log, and we can understand what's been attached to the cell to support the number. And that support could be, in this case, an image, a report, a PDF report, an Excel report, anything that helps validate why the total number tonnage is 778, or in effect, if this number had to be revised, why it was changed. You can also go in and look at deploying attachments for the entire site. Things that you might want to attach are things like the composite data, the raw drill hole data, and even specific, perhaps the block model that informed these numbers, the block model information or block model file that informed these numbers for auditing purposes. And so what that enables us to do then, as when we talk about auditing, we're now talking about the transparency principle within the list, the tenements of basic principles for our reporting codes. So I'm going to now navigate into resources really quickly and show you that the information can be entered here. We can go ahead and type that information. I can go ahead and say, this is now 100 contained ounces, for example. I can save this. And again, the act of making that change immediately, that transparency bit, we can come in here and see how that has changed, how that's evolved. Much like we can do reserves and resources, we can also apply some reconciliation, some year-on-year comparisons. And so in this case, we can look at reserve reconciliation year-on-year comparison. We can look at things like depletions, any changes in price, but it doesn't stop there. we can use the data capture workflows or the data capture pages to track modifying factors such as metallurgical recoveries. We can track additional modifying factors like mining prices, processing costs. We can detail our tenure. We can identify any environmental or ESG risks, the sustainability accounting standard board impacts that we may be required to create. And then ultimately, that leads us to the generation or the summarization of a checklist. The checklist allows the user to ensure that they've completed the steps correctly, and that hopefully the review process will lead to an accepted sign-off. And so what you're looking at here now is specifically a workflow that has already been completed. If you remember, yellow means completion. And so then you can see this is the list of things that the user has to be able to acknowledge were entered before they're able to finalize sign-off on their workflow. Now we can move into the reporting. Now, once this data is imported, or once this data is loaded into the system, we can actually generate some dashboards. And so we can do the dashboard generation within the interface very, very quickly. And so we can drill down and say, well, we only want to look at the debrief information specifically. So I can click on debrief, and I'm looking at only debrief proven and probable charts. We can then drill down further inside this graphing, and I can say I only want to look at Cerro Alto, or I want to look at the full suite of data, proven probable reserve total tonnages. You can see the level of interactivity in this pivot grid to generate this dashboard. A lot of people get excited when we talk about waterfall charts. So I'm going to quickly bring this up. Is this waterfall charting here? And so just really quickly, things that we can do within the interface. Now, let's take a step back and go back to the organizational chart. The organizational chart specifically, I was talking earlier about reporting areas. Now imagine what we could do if we could tie the block model information and actually retrieve the block model information directly from your general mine planning package model. So think Vulcan, think Datamine, think Deswik. What would happen if we could interact with that data directly? And from that premise, we can actually go into the K2Fly model manager interface. And if you think about that organizational chart, if I go quickly back to this, we have a business unit of iron ore, and we're going to be looking at the BlackRock block model data. So we have a similar structure within the model manager interface, and we can go into BlackRock, and we can take a look at the block models that inform that BlackRock resource reserve detail. What we're seeing now here is the block model manager interface, but we're seeing the block models. And what this means for us is that we are now able to centralize the block model information in one spot. If there's a new version available, you don't have to guess at which flat file sitting on a server is actually the latest model. The model manager interface can help you validate that by ensuring that you understand the current status of the model. Somebody at the sign-off level has to approve that model, but we are centralizing the model. And what that means is now that this represents some analytics opportunities. We can actually track evolution of the block model, year-on-year changes to the block model very quickly. And we can do that through the use of queries specifically. So if I come into the queries section, we can look at generating a swath plot, for example, for that BlackRock model. And I have a query, and I can use Python, or you'll see all the other query types that are supported. But another thing to note here is that we can not only support these specific query types, we can actually integrate to external systems such as Power BI, Tableau, R, whatever your favorite system may be. I like to use Python because it helps me write or summarize the instruction very, very quickly. All I need to know to be able to use Python is the table name where the relevant information is stored, which is something that is captured in this repository. It is a standard database, it is a database, a centralized database for all the model data. So that query being defined I can now run that query, BlackRock swath plot, and I can quickly generate that swath plot. Now, I can also do cross-model queries. And what I'm doing here is I'm validating gold content from an earlier version of a model to its latest version. Not a big change, sufficient change, but not a big one. But it illustrates what we can now do with Model Manager as we and envision tying it back to resource disclosure. Now, finally, I want to talk to you about mine reconciliation as a workflow within resource disclosure. So if we go back to the workflow concept from a premise of the organization chart and the workflow definitions, I have a handful of mine reconciliation flows. As before, there's a welcome page. There are some mine recon results. In here, what you're going to see is mine recon results on a monthly cadence, but this cadence can be yearly. You can quarterly. You can define the cadence as you need to. We are using the accepted standard these days, Parker F1, F2, F3, just to illustrate what's possible within the interface. There's some data in here. Of course, if the data gets reviewed from the premise of auditing, from the premise of updating, we can export this data. We can export this data, and I'm going to go ahead and open that export result. And we can make a change. We can say, well, this number now is really like 10,000. I reviewed it. I think that January number should be something different. Information says it is, maybe. We can save that, and we can import that structure back into this interface. And what you're going to see if you look closely is you will see some of the F factors change because those tons changed. So I'm going to upload this momentarily here. All the other numbers certainly would remain the same, but you'll see that the F1 tons dropped. And again, transparency principle, we can see that there was a change enabled. We can then run a dashboard or a report for this here now, and we can go into Mine Reconciliation 2024. Pick the relevant template, confirm that that's what we want to run. And as before, we get specific charting and interacting with that data within the interface. And we can see the charting of the F1 factors, the F2 factors, and the F3 factor. So in a nutshell, by implementing these three tool sets, we can apply or we can satisfy the materiality principle and apply robust governance using these three tools and integrating them together. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jessica, and we are now at the question stage of our brief webinar.
Thank you very much.